Welcome back to our classroom. Today we are joined by Dr. Maggie Broderick, an associate professor and dissertation chair in the Department of Teacher Education at National University. With over 20 years of experience in education, both higher ed and K-12 settings, she is a leader in curriculum development and is passionate about fostering social emotional learning, SEL, in students, which is what we are going to be talking about today. SEL is one of those hot topics in education, and certainly, at least from our perspective, it is needed. It is needed. We need strategies. We need to know how to best implement them. We need to know how it is that SEL and SEL, an effective SEL approach, can help us to better meet the needs of our students. So, Dr. Broderick, thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much, Roberto. It's wonderful to see what you're doing with the podcast and delighted to join you today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the context of SEL in today's educational landscape. I think that's a good starting point for us. How has the understanding and implementation of SEL evolved in K through 12 schools over the past decade?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. Like I mentioned earlier, I thought it was great to see the episodes you have in your podcast, and you're bringing up some of the changing times we're living through these days. Which, if you look at it from an outside point of view and go like, "Wow, it's a lot tumultuous times, a lot of things happening with our students, their families, our teachers, communities." And so I was looking at, for example, how you're focusing on things that really tie right into human well-being and emotional support, which is what we're talking about with SEL today. I saw you mentioning something in an episode about teacher burnout and educator mental health in another episode. And I'll tell you, SEL figures in exactly with that because I think the most important thing I can say today is that it's not just for our students. It's absolutely for our students, but it's also for our teachers
That's
and
a
for
good
just
point.
every human, every single human. Yeah. So I can tell you, a little bit about that. You asked about sort of the trajectory there. I guess it's becoming kind of a buzzword, and you alluded to that, but it goes so much deeper, right? Some people, I guess, since COVID, since the pandemic, kind of said, "Oh, that's a solution like we do in teaching." We're like, "Oh, there we go. There's an approach we take because of XYZ, we do ABC." And so I can see why it's becoming a buzzword, and you're hearing more about it, but it's not really a new idea at all. There are some organizations who have framed the idea of SEL over really the last few decades, like before sort of the more recent tumultuous times we're living in, right? And they have really kind of framed it in a framework where we can make sense of it and kind of pinpoint it. But really, going way back, and I've been around a while, it's really what we might have talked about 20, 30 years ago as sort of soft skills. So really working to understand yourself as a human being, understanding other people, whether it's, if you're a kid, understanding your teacher or your peers or your parents and other things, or, also the things that go along with that. So skills like communication and empathy, so important, self-regulation and reflection and personal growth. And so, like I said, there's an organization called CASEL,
Yes. Yep.
CASEL, you know the one?
You're familiar with Castle.
Yeah, they are great. So hopefully your listeners are aware, but if not, they can check it out at castle, .org. And they've got these 5 competencies, and they just have taken that idea, okay, empathy and self-reflection and self-awareness, and they package it in a way where we can go, okay, pinpoint it clearly. So we can look at those Castle 5, they call them: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision making. We have relationship skills, and then the social awareness. And they just kind of framed it in those Castle 5. And you can see a lot of schools thinking about that instead of like, like I said, I've been around, I've been a teacher and a parent. Some schools have been doing like all rewards and punishments. This is framing it in a new way where we can think about things a little more deeply, thinking about building up those 5 skills, those 5 sort of parts of the framework in a person over time, right? With the whole school, hopefully, hopefully involved, because it takes a lot of work.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that it's not just for students. Oftentimes when we talk about SEL, we are talking about it from the perspective of meeting the needs of the students. But it's interesting to think about it in terms of the work that we are doing or should be doing in schools to better equip those that are on the ground, right? To better equip school leaders, to better equip instructors and others, anybody who's working with our young people, so that they have self-awareness, right? That they're working on their empathy, that they're hitting the CASEL 5. And because they're mastering those areas and developing their skills, what was known, as you said, as soft skills before, that they are better equipped to support our learners in doing so and can model that for our learners.
100%. You got it. And teacher attrition, I've heard about it since I started teaching. I became certified to teach in 1994. It's been 30 years. And you hear about people leaving and statistics like, gosh, huge number of teachers leave in the first 5 years, right? And you mentioned burnout and all that. If we're not taking care of the teachers, how can we ask them to give that emotional support and that emotion labor, for their students if they're not getting it for themselves, right?
Absolutely. And that actually bleeds into my next question, which is how does effective SEL implementation influence student well-being? And we could talk also about adult well-being, particularly in terms of mental health and academic performance. And if you have some examples from schools or districts that you have seen significant improvements through the SEL programs, that'd be good to hear. And one of the reasons I'm asking this question is because while you and I support SEL, we know that there are others that don't, and there's been a push against SEL initiatives. I live in Florida, and I say this in a lot of my episodes, and I'm sorry that I have to say this, folks, but it is what it is. This is the reality of the state that I live in, that programs such as SEL are getting shunned. And so maybe you could speak to the importance of how this plays into mental health, academic performance, and again, any examples of school districts or schools that you've seen significant improvement.
So true. Well, you hit the nail on the head there, Roberto, because I work with people all over the place. That's one of the joys of online teaching and learning, right? So I have students where you are in Florida, and I have, doctoral students, and they're elsewhere. And I'm like, okay, if we're writing a course here for these learners, if I write it and I say, well, here's what, is an approach that we might think about, say SEL or something else, like you mentioned in some of your episodes, culturally responsive techniques, which are super, super important, making sure that you have culturally sustaining pedagogy, which I
Yes.
saw in some of your podcasts, right? And so saying that message to a teacher in Florida has a different impact on that teacher than say, I don't know, Massachusetts, or I'm in
What?
Pennsylvania,
And
right?
I'm
Yeah.
from Massachusetts.
Oh, wow. See, small world, right? My cousin's up there.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I
So
can
it's always,
speak acutely to the difference that I experienced as an educator in Massachusetts and now as somebody in the education space here in Florida.
isn't that the truth? Yeah. And so it's like you have to think, okay, how will the teacher internalize that message that we're saying, whether it's about, sort of having that culturally sustaining pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, or, SEL. How is that then connecting research and practice, and what are they going to do with it? Right. So it's really going to depend. I was just talking about that the other day. But yeah, I think it's important to think about how things like SEL do dovetail with that approach, because we want to use that as a kind of a guiding compass, which I can talk about a little more later, and meeting students where they are, right, on those interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. So one example I'll share, because like there's just way too many. Some schools where it has been implemented, it does stem more out of California, and like you said, politically, of course, a little more receptive there for the most
Right.
part, right? So Sanford Harmony, it's called Harmony Academy. They have a program that is available. And so what people can do is utilize that in their schools in grades PK through 6. And so it demonstrates evidence of effectiveness. At grade 5, they measure that. And they do have it in English and Spanish, which I think is great. But they are partnered with different schools. And what I see from them when I talk to the folks at Harmony, they say, oh, this school uses the whole school. And this one was this one little teacher who's like a little dot. Rest of the school or the state or whatever, maybe not so much. But, this one teacher is implementing it. And so I always think, hey, start small, right? With some of the things. But they have some free stuff on their site, which is great. So I love that. I always point to them. They've got examples on their site of schools where implementation has occurred, and not just in California, all over. And they've got other things. But basically, it looks like, you could think about any angle that is an issue, whether it's that small start in your little classroom, in your little dot, or if you're able to be the leader of the school and maybe you have support from the state, that'd be great. All those sorts of things. But if not, starting small, decreasing stereotyping, bullying, and aggression and things like that. And you can take like a very short amount of time if you have to be that little dot in that, let's say a big pond and you're just one little fish. You could just do 5 or 10 minutes a day and kind of build off of it. So I really love that. But when I think about what they do at Harmony and those examples that are on Harmony Academy's site, I think about it for my doctoral students. Like I actually think about them because it happens for them as well. The same things that a first grader, second grader, third grader needs to think about, working as a team with people, or reflecting on if they felt a little angry today or frustrated. I mean, getting a doctorate is really hard and frustrating, right? So the same exact lessons, just as an adult learner. And then with that in mind, we have like many doctoral students pursuing dissertations about this, where I work at National University. And then we also have courses where people can tack on this little piece so they can do with it what they want. They can either be like, I'm a leader implementing an entire school program, or just that little tiny bit. So yeah, some examples there. I think Stanford Harmony is where I'd point your listeners, because they have a zillion examples of, where people do a big scale thing or a small scale thing. But that idea of helping with the bullying, the stereotyping, those things where they come from the inside, but then you see them in the interpersonal stuff with other people as kids, and adults have to interact with everybody else.
Right. And a couple of times I heard you mention start small, and it makes me think about integration. And I'm wondering what are the common challenges or misconceptions that educators face when trying to integrate SEL into their classrooms, and how can teachers overcome these barriers to create a more supportive learning environment?
I mean, that's the goal. When I think back to my own teaching, I taught music, and I just want everyone to have that sense of belonging.
Mm,
Heck, we're an ensemble, right? We're supposed to play music together. And if we are not feeling that, my kids would call it a vibe. My kids
right,
are
right.
22, 18, and 13, right? So
Yes,
I'm thinking
yes.
of their word, the vibe. If they
Yes, that's
don't
right.
feel it, yeah, yeah. If they don't feel it, they don't feel the belonging and the support and all this stuff, then it's not gonna work. But just like you said, there are some misconceptions out there. We find misinformation very often, just like anything else. There's just a lot of noise. And it's tricky, like you mentioned, with politics and social media. Will put things out there, and it's not exactly right. And it will get conflated, like you mentioned. SEL is really just sort of about humans who could
Mm,
really say, oh, we're against that. But yet, if you conflate it with some other thing and lump it together and jump to conclusions, people do that a lot. I
yes,
think they see all the noise, right? And they're like, I'm against this. And it's a thing of SEL. You need to think a little more deeply, right? So we saw that with COVID, right? Like people just jump to conclusions and they're like, oh, this is all something I don't like, and it's in this bucket, and this is all something I do like, and it's so much more nuanced. You know, so I think there was just a huge need for it during the pandemic, and people maybe got a little confused about what is it, but really it's just what's human, what we're supposed to think about as human. And I would tell people, if they're curious, maybe do a library search or like a Google Scholar search, or like find like the primary sources about SEL and like dive in on those instead of sort of listening to that noise. Because yeah, it's so easy to find some conflating it with, I don't know, any other thing, and they go, nope, not on that side. It's like very politically polarized, and it doesn't have to be that way. We're all human. Everyone can benefit from growing. And I think if you really do a little research, if anybody thinks about it and looks at the CASEL website and thinks about things from like that primary source lens, they'll be like, oh yeah, I get it. I get the vibe, just like we were saying.
that's right. And I'm going to continue to build on the notion of starting small, because I'm thinking about educators who are new to the field. A lot of new folks coming in because there are a lot of folks who have been going out, in a lot of places they're still struggling with teacher vacancies. And so I'm thinking about teachers who are stepping in and everything feels new to them, including this concept of SEL. So, what are two or three strategies that for the one who's starting small, as you mentioned previously, two or three strategies that you would recommend they implement to get them going?
Yeah, that's so smart. You have me thinking back. I mean, makes me feel a little old thinking back that it's almost 30 years ago. But I remember as a young teacher, 22 years old or whatever it was, being so excited and thinking, oh gosh, I know this and this and this, and I love teaching music and kids are going to love it. And then you get to teach and some things go well, and then you go, gosh, that lesson went really not so much as I planned, or you have some classroom management issues and all of that, excuse me. And so it can be really daunting. It can be exhausting. And then you do have those relationships with the other teachers. I remember being a young teacher and teachers saying, this isn't how we do it here, and you need to do it our way, and all of that. It's quite a bit. So I think with that in mind, it does behoove everybody to take the temperature of where they're standing, right? Are you in a school climate where this is something that's embraced and you're like, yeah, I can jump in and do it? Or do you need to find those few people that you're going to align with and go, okay, we're going to do this? That helps, first of all. Otherwise, super overwhelming. I mean, that classroom management piece, I think, is
A
probably
huge piece.
mostly why teachers end up leaving. I mean, it's a really hard thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So from there, I mean, we said starting small, right? And those folks at Sanford Harmony, they have some great strategies. One of those small strategies, they have, the meetup, and you can just have a really simple sort of thing to foster that learning community. And so when I was a young teacher, I remember my principal giving me really great guidance. I hadn't thought about it all. Nobody said this is how you write a lesson plan or whatever, but she said just have something at the very beginning of class that sets the tone. So I started putting on music and I
Mm.
started having them do like a journaling activity, and it was like 30 years ago. But the same idea, if you had this meetup strategy, like at the beginning of your class, you're setting a tone. Like this is, you know, we care about things. Like, for example, how will we treat each other here? Have a little meeting, share ideas and experiences with each other, explain some celebrations. Like, hey, this is a great thing. I saw so and so helping the other child on the playground yesterday. Just a little classroom meeting at the beginning of class, a little meetup. The entire classroom can set goals and guide discussions. It'll take about 15 minutes or so to just kind of do this as setting the tone, right? Instead of just jumping in here, do this assignment,
Mm.
right? You have
Right.
to you set the classroom, and then you sense of belonging, and things like that. Another thing they mentioned at Sanford Harmony, and I'll always point people there because it's wonderful free stuff. Buddy Up is where they have a peer buddy system and they can get to know each other. So we can all think of that. I do it with my doctoral students. If I
Mm.
see a doctoral student who's floundering and I go, I wonder, I think they would benefit from this and that. Like maybe they could talk to this other doctoral student or this person who just graduated. And sometimes they will work together. And then we have online spaces for them to do that and say, oh, maybe find someone so you're not feeling so isolated. You are part of the belonging and sense of community, working on that intrapersonal, interpersonal while you're working on academics, which it's a lot. It's a lot. So yeah, I think looking at that Sanford Harmony site along with the CASEL 5, you can start small and then you just build from there with some of those strategies.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of setting the tone and helping folks feel like they belong, right? Helping the students feel like they belong. It's important that we communicate and maintain an intentionality there, right? That intentionality should be consistent and it should become contagious. It should become
Yes.
contagious, right? So
Yes.
part of our duty in setting the tone is modeling for our learners, uh, but also affirming them when we see them actually doing the things that we want to see them do. That is good for our community. That helps bring along a sense of belonging.
Love it. Love it. Yes.
So looking ahead, what do you see as the long-term benefits of SEL for both students and schools, and how can educators and administrators ensure that SEL remains a priority in the ever evolving educational landscape because it's competing with a lot of different things, even though I think that sometimes we allow for all these things to be in competition when, oftentimes some of them they should work in conjunction. You know,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
like we part of what we teach is that, anti-bias work, anti-racist work, the work of um, you know, creating spaces that focus on culturally sustaining practices that works in conjunction with SEL, not in
Exactly.
isolation. And so, yeah, wondering how you view the future outlook as it relates to SEL long-term benefits and
Yeah.
also, it remaining a priority in the changing landscape of education.
I agree with you 100%. Those things go together in my mind. I picture sort of diagrams in my head sometimes. I'm like, these things kind of go together in a Venn diagram and this beautiful sort of understanding that we're all human. So I think in terms of keeping it in our heart is realizing that same thing we pointed to earlier, that it's not just for students, right? Like we can talk about things like, I don't know, a literacy curriculum approach or a math curriculum approach, and that, changes with the wind every 10 years, of course. But being human doesn't. And so if we realize that as teachers and as leaders, administrators in education, we need it too, then, we might say, well, I'm holding on to this because it's not just something for the students with making sure this fits, I don't know, Common Core or whatever the case might be. So I did another podcast pretty recently, and we were talking about something that I think a lot of teachers realize, especially if we've been around a bit, and it's that the only constant is change.
Mm,
Like I said, every 10 years we got a new approach to literacy instruction. Every couple of years we have this or that, and it's changed. Always you have to be on your toes. And then, changing family dynamics and cultural dynamics and new things to think about where you're in a new context with different people in the intrapersonal and the interpersonal, all of it. So, teachers know it. We know it's true for us, and we have to be ready to embrace it. And so I think whether you're new to it or have a grounding in SEL, just that starting small is really going to help a lot and sustain it that way. And realizing it's not just some fad, it's not just some sort of change where we'll say, no, now we're doing this way. No, we're doing that way. It's human. And so with that idea, what could we do more to infuse it a bit more each time, instead of throwing it all at once? Start small, keep building. It's really more of a perspective and an approach
mm.
rather than sort of like, here's a cookie cutter, thing to do. But that relationship between the teacher and student, you alluded to that so well, and their families and their communities. And I think of my adult learners, when a doctoral student defends a dissertation, sometimes their spouse or significant other or whatever the case may be, or their mom is there. They could be 45 years old and their mom is there. And it is beautiful. And so understanding that, whether we're talking about a child, 5-year-old child, first day of school, or an adult learner, 45, 50 years old, getting that doctoral degree, and mom is there cheering them on. Sometimes I don't know because the mom, the name is just there and they're muted, they're quiet.
Mm.
And I say, oh, anybody else want to speak? And they're so proud. It's beautiful. So yeah, involving those communities, understanding that, this isn't some passing fad. This is human, whether you are 2 years old, 5 years old, 50 years old, 84 years old, does not matter. It's for everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this is the part of the interview where I get to ask you if you had the opportunity to have lunch with anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
This is a hard one. So, I looked at the questions earlier. I knew this was one question that you sometimes ask. And I was like, I have to really think about it. That's the kind of thing where I had to get personal. And I was like, well, it makes me emotional because, truthfully, I'd want to spend some time with someone I lost years ago, which is specifically my dad. He died
Mm,
20 years ago. And I thought about answering with a celebrity or inspirational academic scholar. Would you like to talk to Vygotsky? Which I've been very inspired by Vygotsky's work. Sure. But honestly, today's topic is SEL, and being authentic is a huge part of that. Being open, authentic, and communicating, and really expressing our heart and being in tune with our heart. And honestly, if I could just, I don't want to tear up, but if I could spend that little more time with my dad and catch up, that would be most special to me.
well, thank you for sharing. We appreciate the vulnerability. So, what's a message of encouragement that you want to offer the audience?
Well, thinking about your audience as teachers and how, important it is to sustain themselves and give that, part, they're giving their heart so much in what they do. I would say just take that time to truly know your heart. Life can be so confusing, so overwhelming, really exhausting, and we're providing, a lot for others. But in the end, your heart won't steer you wrong. Just sort of reflect on that. And that's a huge part of SEL. Using your heart as your compass. Who am I? The self-awareness, the
Mm.
reflection. And then from there, what brings you joy? What motivates you in your life? And let your heart guide you, I would say. It might be, all sorts of ways. I've done a lot of things, but always I have that heart of a teacher in there. It's just, that's my heart, my compass. So if I find myself doing something else, I'm like, is this true to my heart or not? And if you can stay true to that, I think it really does help us with the SEL and with what we're doing and called to do as teachers.
Stay true to your heart. It's a good message for us. So, for those that want to learn more about your work, they want to connect with you, they want to expand their SEL toolbox, where can they connect with you?
Oh, thanks. I can give them three ways. LinkedIn, great, great. You can just look me up on LinkedIn. I have my email address, which is just mbroderick for Maggie Broderick at NU. nationaluniversity.edu. And then I do run a center that is public facing from National University, which is our Advanced Research Center. So if you just look up National University ARC, Advanced Research Center, I'm there. And what we do at that center is we actually guide people towards presentations and publications when they're scholars, faculty, staff, students, alumni. So another way you can find me online is through ARC.
There you have it, folks. Three ways that you could connect with Dr. Maggie Broderick and take some gems from this particular episode and apply it to your individual practice. Those of you that are in classroom spaces, if you're not doing so already, we encourage you to start small on this SEL journey, but definitely utilize the resources that are made available to you. One, because it's going to be good for your own health, right? Your mental health, but also just your sustainability in the classroom. And then two, because it's going to be great for our youngsters, our learners. They need to develop these skills. They need to be able to tap into their emotions. They need to be able to navigate through all the different relational dynamics that they experience in the school setting and beyond. And the more that we can equip them, the better they're going to be able to respond to the various situations that they will encounter in life, positive and negative. So thank you, Maggie, for the insight that you've offered us here and the work, the scholarly work that you've been doing around SEL for years. We appreciate you and certainly look forward to learning more from you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.